Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining today's Fireside Chat, Attacks on Infrastructure and Why It's Important to Secure Linux. My name is Lisa Molcaba, and I'm the Marketing Director here at Capsule8. I am joined by Vicki Knott, CEO and co-founder of CruxOCM, Thomas Olofsson, CTO of BT Block, and John Viega, co-founder and CEO of Capsule8. John will be serving as our moderator today. He's an expert in building defensive systems to protect against exploitation of previously unknown vulnerabilities and building successful companies to bring those systems to market. Most recently, he was EVP of cloud security provider SilverSky, successfully transforming them from a managed service provider to an innovative cloud security company. Following the successful acquisition of SilverSky, he went on to be the EVP of product, where he had responsibility for a portfolio of analytics products that spanned financial crime and security. Prior to SilverSky, John was SaaS CTO at McAfee. He's an award-winning author with half a dozen books to his name, including Building Secure Software, the first book for software engineers on how to build secure programs, and Network Security with OpenSSL. John also co-designed the GCM encryption mode, which is used for more than 70% of encrypted web traffic. Before I turn it over to him, a few housekeeping items. We love questions, so if you have any questions, please do type them into the Q&A box, and John will read them for the panel at the end of the presentation. Also, this fireside chat will be available on demand on the BrightTalk platform. So with that, I will turn it over to John.
Thanks, Lisa. Boy, I forgot half those things, so thanks a lot there. So today we're going to take a look at the Colonial Pipeline hack, but more broadly discuss how fragile our critical infrastructure is and what the industry should be doing about it. So let's start by having our panelists briefly introduce themselves, and let's start with you, Vicki.
So yeah, hi, thanks for having me, John. Vicki Knott, so CEO and co-founder of CruxOCM. My background is in heavy industrial automation and pipeline operations, actually. And CruxOCM as a company, we've developed software to fully automate control room operations, so how control room operators execute procedures, checklists, and rules of thumb in heavy industry. But yeah, primary backgrounds in pipeline, so know lots about these control systems.
Great. And Thomas?
Hi, yeah, my name is Thomas Olofsson. My background is as a nowadays more a cybersecurity expert. It wasn't called that back in days. It was called a white hat hacker. So I started with background in offensive security, breaking into system, penetration testing, see how to act as one of the bad guys and actually test the security of various organizations. So I've hacked a lot of stuff, everything from banks to central banks to power plants. So I have a lot of that background of actually doing that. And more later in my career, I also started worrying a bit like this is way too easy. So I started with secure development. How do you actually build secure code? How do you make resilience against this? And lately I've been working with threat actor monitoring, actually seeing emerging threats, cyber threats, and working with like open source intelligence and trying to find these things before they get to real threats to the organizations. So yeah, that's short background.
Great. Well, thank you both for being here. Really excited to be talking with you both. So let's start with the Colonial Pipeline hack. Vicki, could you give us an overview? I think it's been in the news so much, hopefully everybody knows, but would love to understand what really happened.
Yeah, so from what we've read and what it sounds like is the single sign-on authority was what was infiltrated, I guess. The single sign authority, again, depending on how these companies architect their security, they could literally have one single sign-on for absolutely everything in their entire organization, whether that's accessing your SCADA screens to be able to operate the pipeline or logging into your business databases to be able to actually bill your customers and know where the product is in the pipeline. So yeah, if that's exactly what was shut down, then effectively every single employee in the company had no access to any of their systems, which would result in immediate shutdown of the asset. Why that? Obviously there's an immediate shutdown of the asset. You can get the asset back up and running, which is what they did through what they called manual, but actually through the PLC codes, through the PLC code at every single pump station. So you're going in going straight into the PLC, hooking up a computer, and turning on your pump station. That's not something a lot of folks know how to do anymore. So that's definitely a risk. Then on the business side, why it's concerning is if you don't know where the products are for your customers and you don't have their billing information, you can't invoice them and get paid. So if you can't get paid, you're effectively racing against the clock towards, running out of free cash flow and bankruptcy. So that's why it's kind of scary.
So was it so it was certainly it heard that they couldn't bill, and that's why everything shut down. But was the actual critical infrastructure controlling how oil's flowing through the pipes disrupted?
It sounds as though it was not. Sounds as though there was no safety incidents. There was no spills associated with it. There was no equipment breakage associated with it. So what that means is that there was no hack into the actual SCADA system, the supervisory control and data acquisition, which would have affected the pressure limits or the safety limits of the assets.
Got it. Mm. And Thomas, have you heard anything about the aftermath of the attack?
Well, yeah, funnily enough, it's quite interesting. What's happened to DarkSide after this is DarkSide is the group that actually took responsibility and actually posted on their website. And these hacking groups have now started what used to be ransomware, where you just like randomly installed it. They are now very selective in their targets and do find targets that are really high value. But what happened after this attack, since this is actually affecting a lot of people, we seen on social media, people like are really affected by not getting gas, and then you become a target yourself. So what happened to DarkSide after this is that they became a too big target, because now there's a lot of white hat hackers, government agencies, everyone all of a sudden is like, what are these guys doing? We cannot let this happen. So in the aftermath, they have been hacked and they have had all their servers hijacked. And while hijacking the servers, they found, or someone, we don't know if it's a government agency still, or if it's another hacker, but someone found their private key and actually stole all their Bitcoin. So they have basically lost everything. So they the other day released the decryption keys for all their clients, which they have hacked and encrypted their software. So they just released the decryption key so everyone can get their data back and say, yes, we will cooperate with law enforcement, because they have really been pinpointed, became a target because they hacked something that was too critical for what they were.
They went too big.
They went too big for their own. Definitely, they didn't expect this to get these sort of attention.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. But they knew who they were ransoming, and do you think that they were targeting them specifically because they thought they might pay the cash, or was it how did they decide, do we think, on the Colonial Pipeline?
Well, in previous attacks, I mean, this is not the first attack that's happening to critical infrastructure. It has happened before. It's rumors that some of the brownouts that we had in California a couple of years ago were actually attacks and ransom, but those were ransomware attacks that just randomly happened to hit something. Those were not like actually targeted. But the big hack that we've seen before was Aramco in Saudi Arabia that got hit, and also had a very similar. They had their pipeline, they had everything shut down by that ransomware attack. They couldn't operate, and they just kept pumping. But the same there, they couldn't charge any money, so they couldn't. They could give away the oil, and they had to give away the oil for free because they couldn't charge. So that's also very interesting standpoint. But yes, they are choosing the money because they know that these guys pay, because they're not tech savvy, and that's what we've seen before. So obviously we have seen online casinos and online banks were the first to be targeted. The online banks are not too targeted anymore because they don't pay. But the guys that keeps paying, that's the target they keep selecting.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly have seen critical infrastructure problems that were accidental. Like there was an early one where there was an exploit that led to a train system in the Pacific Northwest having an issue, and it was believed that that was just some exploit that got triggered, but the attacker didn't know what they were targeting. And that indicates that a lot of things that are critical infrastructure are connected pretty directly to the internet. And when people talk about the Colonial Pipeline attack in particular, I think it's natural for people to ask, why not an air gap? And so would love to get both of your takes on that. Are people kind of being too permissive and hooking too much up to the internet, or are there reasons that are good reasons? And then what do we do about it?
So in like the oil and gas industry, most of the big oil and gas cos, even if they are moving to cloud, they're moving to private hosted clouds. So they aren't connected directly, especially their internal control systems. So like for us, when we're deploying software, it actually helps our sales cycle to be like, we are not in the cloud and we are not in the internet. We will deploy on your server inside your firewalls. And that's certainly been what the industry, when it comes to their control systems, is still comfortable with.
Yeah, and I agree there that 10 years ago, basically everything was just hooked up to. But I think even in most industries now, there is a much better understanding. What's happened lately, though, is that the ransomware guy have improved. They're like finding the single point of failures. Okay, you have a single sign-on function there. If we target that, we can still exploit you. So they have leveled up. I think the industry at large have really improved their defenses. But especially post-COVID, we have a lot of unemployed people with high education and good bandwidth that have a lot of time. So the threat actors have also upped their game. I think that's the race that we're seeing, actually.
So find the jump box.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the company that manages the Colonial Pipeline paid a $4.4 million ransom, but the FBI's guidance is not to pay ransom to ransomware because it to anybody that's trying to hold your systems hostage, because it encourages the behavior. So how do you think about that in a case where critical infrastructure is involved? Did they do the right thing here, or what else should they have done?
I think they did the right thing. I know not everyone's gonna agree with me. And then then we go forward from here and try to up the defenses and get smarter and better. But like a pipeline like Colonial is probably, the revenue that they're pulling in daily could very well be in the 10 to 15, 20 million a day. So for them to be down like for a week, the revenue that they're losing is such a massive multiple of what that payout is. 4.4 million sounds like so much to everyday me and you. But for a pipeline of that size, that might be half a day or a day of operation. So let's pay it, get back up and running, and then figure out how to get better. If you look at the Norsk Hydro case where they didn't pay, all of the reflective studies on that they actually lost way more by not paying in terms of the financial impact.
Well, there will be a lot of people that care less about oil company profit and more about the people that are impacted from oil shortages. So I guess if they hadn't paid, there'd be a shortage. And how long do you think it would have lasted, and how severe would it have been?
So if they hadn't paid, and say it took 3 weeks to a month to get the line back up and running, there absolutely would have been a shortage. Gas prices would have went up because tankers would have had to started coming in from Europe and other parts of the world to fulfill that need. So then consumers would have been heavily impacted by fuel prices in a fairly short term. It probably would have been a few weeks before we would have seen it, but it would have happened. And then if the Colonial Pipeline itself went say they went bankrupt because of the situation, then you'd have a messy mergers and acquisitions thing that would have to start happening, and then plus getting that workforce back up and running as quickly as possible. So yeah, I think a good point, like on not that many people care about the financial impact of oil and gas companies, but oil and gas companies tend to happen to be the lifeblood of our society right now, whether we like it or not. Even though we're trying to get away from them. But they would that pipeline being down for a month or 2 months would impact everyone in the US's livelihood for sure. It would have had an impact.
And I think that was the thing that they didn't calculate with from the threat actor. They thought like, hey, we're Robin Hood, we're stealing from an oil and gas company.
Mm-hmm.
What could possibly go wrong? But when people realize that it will lead to I'm not getting gas in my car, then you're hitting on the normal person, and
Mm-hmm.
then you're hitting a very negative. No one cares if you steal from a bank, and maybe not from an oil company, but if it affects the end client, if you can't take money out of the ATM, or you can't fill up your car. So
you can't drive your kids to daycare, right? Like that's a huge problem. And then to John's point of there being lots of really smart people with a lot of bandwidth right now that are unemployed, they can quickly create that task force to go after DarkSide on the other end, right?
Well, but geopolitically, a lot of attacks like this come out of parts of Asia where it's really tough to go after the attackers, and they are not necessarily the most friendly nations to the U.S. So is paying this ransom going to embolden that kind of an attacker to go after more U.S. infrastructure? Because I don't think that they care too much about that kind of disruption in the West, as many of them might prefer it.
No, I mean, the servers were in Ukraine, so so we can be quite certain that the majority of the people in this network were Ukrainians, and yes, they are attacking U.S. because they pay. I mean, they are selecting targets that they know are likely to pay and have income. And I worked on a lot of post-forensic investigations after similar attack, denial of service attack. Again, this can be seen as a denial of service attack. They took the pipeline down. And what we've seen is that people that actually pay will get hit again and again, whether you're a bank or online casino. So our advice is always that never pay, because if someone sees you have paid out once, they will try to find another hole and do another attack and charge you more, because then, they could pay $3 million. $3 million was nothing to them.
Yeah.
Let's up the ante bets.
Do you think that that's going to be the case now, since DarkSide got shut down for going so big? So this one is almost like the counter of that would have been what all the studies show now, as by going after a target that big meant that their whole organization is destroyed, right?
Yeah, no, but the funny thing now we're seeing on these darknet sites where they're having these discussions to get into these affiliate networks now. After this attack, the affiliate networks are actually setting up you can't attack healthcare. You can't be a part of our affiliation and attack healthcare or public infrastructures. Those rules are now coming up.
Right.
So and that we've seen just the past week on these underground cyber criminal forums. It's yeah, you can join our affiliate network and get, because they have staking pools and stuff to getting this money out. So yeah, and that's really interesting. So that's changing as well, because of no one wants another DarkSide backlash.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, trying to pivot towards ethical criminal activity.
Yeah, or at least it's I don't know. That's an oxymoron, but yeah.
So this incident kind of implies that our critical infrastructure is pretty fragile. And when you think about it, a lot of the systems that are operational technology tend to be embedded systems, really old systems that SCADA systems tend to not be easy to update. So how at risk are we of, especially in the context of nation-state attack. So what's the risk really, and what's kind of the likely worst case if we had a foreign power that really wanted to hit a Western country really hard?
I would say they were I would say they were quite vulnerable, especially to as you say, these nation-state sponsored attacks where you have where you can use zero-day exploits to actually target core system and then spread inside of the networks. And I think many with me would say that actually the national grid of the electric grid has been talked about many times as like, I think we're sort of lucky that we haven't had more serious incidents with taking the electrical grid down, because there is a lot of different operators, and it's also very similar to a pipeline. It's just an electric pipeline, basically. So yeah, I think there we have a quite large attack window for an external nation state.
Vicki, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not specifically to add. Like I figured this one would be a better question for Thomas. Like, to be honest, in my history of my career, like besides general phishing, the most weird and annoying thing I've seen was a group of people jumped a fence, cut some chains off of valves, and shut down a pipeline manually. So it's like, so I think for, when it comes to pipeline infrastructure, folks are certainly getting more targeted and smarter. But I think it's actually just starting to happen now.
So what then should we be doing as an industry, and companies that are managing critical infrastructure be doing specifically that isn't being done well right now? How do we change practically?
Yeah, so practically, my biggest advice is these big critical infrastructure companies really need to stop assuming that they know everything themselves in-house. They really need to draw on experts such as yourselves to help them out. There is going to be like a terminology language barrier coming in because it's just, they're so used to this certain world. But I think they need help. Like, promoting your IT guy to cybersecurity specialist internally is not going to cut it anymore.
No, and I think also the threat modeling needs to change. There has always been threat modeling. How likely is it that we have an earthquake? Can we insure against this? The threat models need to change to actually take this into account. That, yeah, what about a nation state? What about a ransomware gang? Is these scenarios, have we planned for them? What do we do? How do we shorten the response time? How do we get it up if the plan for the worst to happen? And actually a threat model.
And I've never seen a plan like that in a big energy infrastructure company ever.
That's a missing step because if something then, when it happens, if you haven't had the plan, then everyone's running around as wild crazy and don't know what to do. But if you're a bank, then you're going to get robbed. It's like the number one thing on the threat model is like, how do we not get robbed? Which is so they have done their threat model in a totally different scale than I guess.
Because the critical infrastructure, their number one threat is of course safety, right? Like, and it still needs to be number one, but it's just kind of maybe bumping up cybersecurity from number 10 to number 3, right? That's what's probably the most important. So safety and environment are always their top.
I agree.
Priorities.
Mm-hmm. And if we ignore kind of the physical security side of it all, and you said earlier that the critical infrastructure itself is generally mostly air gapped with like a single choke point, like a jump box, and so but the kind of critical infrastructure, you also said, is pretty long in the tooth and hard to patch or expensive to replace. And so how much do you think that all the focus should be on the choke points, or should we also be worried about kind of old systems that are full of vulnerabilities if people
figured it out,
have access to them, or how do you think about it?
I absolutely think that some of these, like these old PLCs, are not hard to get into, and I think it's grossly underestimated, that risk. I've actually, anecdote for you, I have been in a meeting where a junior engineer, when I was a junior engineer, about my age, and he was trying to explain to the senior manager of the automation team that, here's how I would hack this PLC. Like, this is a big issue. And it was just like, because the people that have been in these organizations for so long, they've never seen it before. It's like you're speaking another language to them. They don't even know how to hear that, right? So then it doesn't get escalated. And it's like, I'm sitting there watching this conversation go on, and I'm like, wow, I can't believe that this manager's not taking this seriously. But they don't know how to take it seriously, right? So there's certainly with the old infrastructure, a lot of vulnerability.
Yeah, and password management as well. When you come into these like legacy system, no one has changed the password since they were installed, and that might have been 20 years ago, and it's still like username password or password, which is actually still very common inside of these organizations. So yeah, there should be obviously some sort of defense in depth, that it shouldn't be like an egg. If you crack the shell, then you have like free flow to everything. And I guess that's also something to learn from the banking world, that you have like, you got into one network. And I think there is more separation needed, and more defenses, like on the control side and on the SCADA side as well, and PLC side. Everything needs to be hardened. At least it will then take longer for an attacker to shut you down, and hopefully you can like minimize the threats while they're trying to hack you before they shut you down.
Yeah, and having an idea that someone's in there doing something, because right now, like the only, like again, you'd have a control room operator watching it and they would know, but then what do they do if they see something weird? They might not have like an emergency protocol of how to deal with it.
Excellent. Well, I think the discussion's been great so far. I would love to give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions. So maybe take a minute and give us any questions that you have. Meanwhile, what does if we look forward to how the government could be helping, or governments can be helping, like what can they be doing to help push the industry in the right direction? Should they be doing anything from a regulatory standpoint, or is that just going to get in the way of progress?
I think offering help would be better, right? I think just putting up regulation, is like, of course, like that may need to be the result at the end of the day. But if you're going to put up the regulation, I think, if government has, obviously, like the U.S. government has some great cybersecurity stuff, they know how to do it. So, helping by creating a program and helping these companies get set up and then giving them the regulation as a response, I think would be the most helpful for sure.
Yeah, and I mean there is stuff done, and like for instance, NIST is doing a great job of actually making standards open for everyone in government and in critical infrastructure. They are making like suggestions and standards. It's not like mandated you have to do it, but if you go to the NIST website, you can find like, how do I secure my network for free, developed by the US government. Cool. for public consumption. So they are doing a lot to try to help to support, but it's not mandated that you have to. But maybe what I think is the most important, maybe we'll see now that we see these losses, that on the board level, this is actually a discussion. Yeah, maybe we should put a guy on reading those NIST documents and see if we can do something to minimize the risk. It needs to be lifted to board level and not be just the techie that decides on the ground.
And then lifted to board level, and then to my previous comment, like lifted to board level, and then hiring someone external who actually has expertise in this, not just promoting your internal IT person who's been with the company for 20 years. They don't have the expertise, and being humble and understanding that they don't.
Mm-hmm. So another question from the audience, which I'm going to broaden the questions about Linux infrastructure in OT systems, but I think what's the prevalence of different operating systems here? Because I think this was all Windows systems for this particular incident, but I've seen in real world OT systems, I think like VxWorks and Linux and kind of even custom operating systems. So kind of what's the prevalence, and do you need to bring in experts or different technology stacks from what we're doing with Windows? How do people address that problem when they don't have kind of the expertise on hand for the platforms that they need to be protecting?
Yeah, I guess for the oil industry, it's mostly Vicki that can answer. Like, what else is there out in the ecosystem? What
Mostly
are people
Windows.
running nowadays?
It's almost all Windows. Yeah.
And the problem that I've seen, for instance, in medical, I work with some medical institutions. Well, it's not only Windows; it's Windows installed by your supplier of the specific system, saying that you have to run Windows ME. And if the IT support guy says, "Hey guys, that hasn't been supported for 20 years, you can't run Windows ME," well, you can't upgrade it because then the laser thingy-majig won't work.
Yep, I've seen that before. Or the whole SCADA system
that's really
won't work.
a problem. It's like you have to run vulnerable software in your system to be able to actually keep working. And that's something that needs to change. And the only way that can change is to demand from your suppliers that you are delivering secure software.
Yeah, so I will say, though, you say, Vicki, that it's all Windows. We Capsule8 have oil and gas customers and prospects that have a multitude of environments that includes Linux in their critical infrastructure. That's pretty significant, like a really significant footprint. That's a blind spot for them. I think that their challenge is exactly what the questioner is asking. That their security teams are kind of built for a Windows world, and they don't get visibility into those other platforms.
Yeah, and exactly, and like I've never heard of Linux, so maybe the folks that I've been around have been running it, but again, they're so not even aware that those that operating system is existing somewhere, right? Like, so for us, when we're deploying our software, we're always on Windows, but yeah, like there very well could be. They could be running it and not even knowing because it's in some corner.
Yeah, because it's embedded, and that's the thing with Linux.
Yeah.
Like most things that are not built by Apple runs Linux somewhere.
Yeah.
That's like nowadays.
Yeah. I can tell you, I've talked to a number of CISOs over the years where I've asked about their Linux footprint, and they thought they had none, and then came back and said, "Oh, I'm told that it's quite large, but we just don't invest in it."
Yeah, so then that's a perfect thing to bring up, because my comment is coming from, again, like my experience of probably being exactly like those vCISOs of like, okay, well, no one's ever talked about it being there, right? Where is it?
Yeah, no one's looking at it when they're doing their audits and so on.
Yeah. I'm sure that's a lot of it.
All right. Well, I think that we've just about reached time. But any final thoughts?
No. Fun chat.
Yeah, it's been fun. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you both. It was great getting to chat with you, and hopefully we'll get to do it again. Thanks for your time.
Great. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, everyone, for joining. If you have any questions, please do feel free to reach out to us at info@capsule8.com. And again, this will be available on demand on our Bright Talk channel. So thank you so much, John, Thomas, and Vicki. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.